guys know that the way that I like to look at astrology is that these archetypes all blend. Nothing is standalone. And we all have each of these archetypes within us, in our psyche, in our humanness. And we're all acting them out all the time. So, with Mercury, one of the things that I don't talk about quite as much is that Mercury is representative of that trickster, that part of our mind that sweeps in and tells us stories. It's very seductive. And if we look at the sign of Gemini and we look at either side of Gemini, which has Taurus, and then there's Cancer. So with Taurus, it's like we want the safety and security, and then the mind gets involved, which is Gemini. And when the mind starts to seek out different ways to influence us, because that's what the mind wants to do, it wants to be, quote, informed. Sometimes being informed, we're informed about things that are true, that are factual, but oftentimes when the mind is involved, we are informed about things that are just stories, stories that we make up, because then we bring in the archetype of Cancer, and that's the emotions. So we want the security on the side of Taurus. And then the emotions get involved in the sign of Cancer, and then the mind goes wild. So this week, we have a really Mercury heavy week. It's making a ton of connections. Mercury rules Gemini, which is the mind. It's the trickster. It's the duality. It's the, yes, there are facts, but there are also things that I feel that influence the facts. Or there are things that I've learned in my past, in my childhood, that influence the facts, right? Because Mercury in Gemini is so tied to our immediate environment, which is our present moment. But how often are you in the present moment? And then there's the immediate environment, which is where we grew up, where we live, what we're watching, what we're listening to, who we're talking to, that totally influence the mind. And then the other sign that Mercury rules is Virgo. And we're doing all of this South Node Virgo stuff around releasing the shadow side of Virgo, which is being critical, being self-righteous, angry and annoyed, and holding everybody to these impossible standards, holding ourselves to perfection. Mercury is a very fast-moving archetype, and boy, does it bring in some garbage. This week, as we are looking at Mercury in the sky, making a ton of connections, we're going to have to watch our own mind, how we are relating to what's coming in, the trickster element of what we're seeing and what we're taking in to be true, what we're believing. And then also that part of us that wants to be right. That's like, hey, this is what I know, and this is the truth. And just think of that part inside of you. If you think about the stereotype of Karen, and I apologize to any Karens that are listening to this, I always think it's terrible when your name gets hijacked into some cultural thing. I remember my daughter went to school with a girl named Siri. Like, oh, that's inconveniencing, isn't it? And again, apologies to Karens. I know some really lovely real life Karens, but we know that that stereotype of the one that's always right, the one that's getting up in people's faces and yelling, like we all have a little version of that inside of us. And we all have a version of the Gemini Mercury that is easily swayed by the incoming information, that wants safety and security, and then the emotions get involved, and oh my God, then it's over. So we're going to talk about that. I'm Nafa Perkins. This is the path ahead, my astrology forecast for the week of October 27th through November 2nd, which means that we're officially in Scorpio season, and I am releasing all of the Scorpio teachings on Astrology for Awakening. So that is a really cool, I'm calling it like astrology school, because in my style, I am teaching you about all of these archetypes, which are psychological, spiritual, and astrological, and completely shed light on who you are and what you're doing. Because yes, we're all unique and different, but we are all humans, and we're all working out predictable crises and trying to discover gifts. And we can get a really good sense of what those are by understanding the archetypes. So whether you're a big astrology person or not, you're going to enjoy these talks. And I'm almost through the entire zodiac. I will, by the time this is done, have released about 70 of these. They're under the playlist Astrology for Awakening on YouTube. And I'm also releasing them on the podcast Star Narratives. So if you like my style and you want to work with me privately, you can find me at electraastrology.com. And let's get into the charts for the week. We begin on the 27th with Mars here in a trine to Jupiter. So at the beginning of the week, we have the Sun, Mars, and Mercury all in Scorpio. Scorpio, as we've been talking about, is this energy of the truth. And when we're talking about Mercury, like I started off this conversation with, Mercury is also concerned in some respect with the truth. Although with Mercury, it gets very convoluted by a million different facts. And we know we're so inundated with information right now and so many different opinions. It's hard to sort through and get what's really real. With Scorpio, the work that we're doing, it does help us to understand that. And so Jupiter ruling Sag, which is across the zodiac from Mercury in Gemini, Jupiter has a lot more interest in the truth, although it's higher level truth. It's like what happens when I have done a lot of research and I've really looked at what is here. And I've looked at many different facets of it. Then what conclusions do I draw? Whereas Mercury is like, somebody sent me a link and then I read it. And somebody said this on TikTok and I believe it. It's a different kind of truth. And then we have Mars over here in Scorpio that's also concerned with a deeper level of truth. The Mars and Scorpio truth is like, what's really going on? Like, what's the real deal? So it reminds me, I was watching this documentary. It's kind of a disturbing documentary. And so I wouldn't say I recommend it. It's on Netflix. It's called The Perfect Neighbor. And in a nutshell, it's about a woman who was really rattled about kids in the neighborhood playing on her yard. It ended up in a tragedy. The bottom line is that they showed many different clips of this woman kind of losing her mind and being so angry about these kids who were just playing football and doing little dances on her yard and whatnot. There's something that's happening underneath the noise that the kids are making. It's more than just those kids are annoying me. It's like there's something deeper going on. There's something deeply psychological that's happening. So I'm bringing this up because I want you guys to be looking this week at what is it that really bugs you? What is it that really feels like that rock in your shoe? And the encouragement here with this aspect is to go deeper. It's not just the rock in the shoe. Anything that is really irritating you or making you very emotionally rattled, there's always something that's deeper. There's always something to be explored. And often it's like go back in time and try to understand what is it really about. And I'm always saying, let's look for the core issues here. What is it that is making you so angry at this person? Or why are you feeling so hurt? Because Jupiter in Cancer is the overblown emotion. And Mars in Scorpio is the desire for the truth. As we're looking at a Mercury heavy week with the mind and how the mind gets so involved in all of these storylines, right? It's like if your mind is coming in and saying, it's those screaming kids, that's what's making me so angry. Well, the mind is tricking you because it's not the screaming kids. The screaming kids are the trigger, but there's something deeper going on that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, in this documentary, her mental health issues went unaddressed and there was a tragedy. What we're saying this week as we're talking about Mercury, which is always connected to mental health, if you're willing to go deep and to just understand the next piece, it's not that you have to understand the entire picture, but there's something really powerful about understanding the next piece of like, what is it? What is really bugging me here within this relationship, within this situation? And once you land on that nugget, spend some time with it, right? With Scorpio, remember, our tendency is to want to numb or manipulate to get our way or blame our problems on somebody else. And so the real work, the real transformational work with Scorpio is to say, I want to sit with this. I'm going to sit with this anger. I want to sit with this discontent. I want to really look at this part of me that feels so incredibly defended or defensive. And I just want to get some more information about it because as we're navigating all of this weird energy in the world, when we push too much of it outside of us and we say it's this politician or it's this policy or it's that person, we lose our power. We totally give our power away. And what's the point of that? So to understand what's really happening on an internal level, on a deeper level, is where we reclaim our power, because then we get to work with what the exact problem is instead of just saying, well, if you didn't say that to me, then I wouldn't be so mad. If you were out here on my lawn yelling and screaming while you were playing football, then we wouldn't have a problem. This Mars trining Scorpio is a really positive aspect, and it greases the wheels a little bit so that you can get into like, ooh, what's the deeper layer here? Because when we understand the deeper layer, that's where we find the self-awareness, and the self-awareness is where we find all of the power. And so we find the power by being aware of our own internal environment. And being aware of our internal environment, our processes, brings us closer to the relationship with higher power. And the relationship with higher power is also incredibly informative. So we see on the 29th that Mercury, right before it switches into Sagittarius, makes this trine with Neptune. This is using your mind to quiet some of the nonsense, some of the storyline, and that fear of not being safe and being secure, and that riling up that the emotions tend to do, because emotions are information, but they are not factual. And so, as Mercury makes this trine to Neptune, this is a good time, and this is the 29th, to really tune into what does your intuition have to say? When we're talking about the mind is full of all of the human stuff. It is reactive to our experiences, to our emotions. It is filled up with a bunch of information that we've acquired along the way. It's influenced by our conditioning. The mind is a useful tool, but it has a lot of nonsense that comes along with it. The intuition, though, is really different. And that is a Pisces thing. The intuition is what informs us about where to go and what to do. Intuition is not murky. It's not influenced by all of these outside factors. So we have to be really quiet in order to actually hear the intuition. And intuition is also connected with our physical body, with what it feels like in our guts, in our solar plexus, in our hearts. But intuition is usually much quieter. And so there's something about tuning in on a deeper level this week that also includes creating enough silence and space to hear your intuitive nudges. Like, what needs to happen so that I can become closer to myself? And in order to come closer to myself, I have to come closer to all that is, which means creating time that I'm not in front of a screen, that I am not distracted by my to-do list, that I am not trying to attain some level of human perfection. Now, right after that, Mercury enters the sign of Sagittarius. Mercury is at detriment in the sign of Sagittarius because right across the way is Gemini, where Mercury rules. So Mercury doesn't love to be in Sag because remember, Sagittarius is the energy that says, I'm looking at the bigger picture. I'm not just looking at the teeny weeny little details. Like I am taking the whole story into account. And so Mercury's already like, oh, but I kind of like to get focused on little facts and I kind of like to get into the details and I like to be right. And then right across the way, we have Uranus at 0 degrees of Gemini. So Mercury moves into this uncomfortable sign and then bam, opposition to Uranus. And these outer planets are the spiritual teachers. So they're always teaching us higher level lessons. So this reminds me a little bit, Mercury is very like youthful. So I'm imagining teenagers and, teenagers know everything. They are very connected to what's happening within the context of their age group and within the context of their life, which isn't a lot because teenagers, at least in the United States, they aren't paying bills. They aren't really living real life. So they're very connected to what their peers want to do, what their peers think is cool and hip and whatnot. So imagine that's Gemini. Gemini is like, yeah, but if you were really cool, you would wear these kinds of clothes and you would listen to these kinds of music and you would use these kinds of words. And Sagittarius is the energy that's like, yeah, but there's this whole life out there. Your idea of cool music, cool clothes, cool words is pretty small. It's pretty contained within your tiny demographic. So let's get out there and let's look at stuff. So And we've all had that where we feel like my little town or the place that I grew up or my sports team or the things that I know are what's real and right and true. And then we get out in the world and it's like, oh my God, it's a completely different story out here. So this is in reference to our mind. So think about those places that exist for you right now where you're in your myopic little view and it's just all that you know and it's going to be uncomfortable this week like oh maybe what I have taken to be true isn't exactly true, or maybe it's only true for me and I'm just one person on this entire planet. And then with this Uranus here, Uranus is like, yeah, you're right, you're going to change your mind about something here. So be looking around your life for what you're changing your mind about and how you're going to see things differently. It reminds me of when I had young kids and I was such a germaphobe. I was always the one that was like, oh, don't cough on me. Oh, wash your hands. Did you wash your hands? And I always thought, I'm being protective of myself. I'm a clean person. I do not expose myself to germs. And then I had kids. And it was like, oh, I either have to change the way that I relate to this or I'm going to lose my mind. So I began to detach myself from that way of thinking. Okay, so you get exposed to germs. So you don't wash your hands after you get home from the grocery store. So the kids are crawling around on a public bathroom because there were things that were out of my control. And if I kept trying to control, I was going to go crazy. And that is the nature of Uranus, especially Uranus in Gemini, which, it's going to be in Gemini for the next 8 or so years. It will go back into Taurus briefly here in the next few months, but the more that we're anticipating that our minds will be blown, that the way that we have always seen things or taken them to be is probably going to be disrupted, the better. So then when that disruption comes, you can go with the flow. So this is a good week to practice that. And then on the 30th, we have Mercury immediately coming into a sextile with Pluto. So I moved to Atlanta in the early 90s, moved from Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, which was a pretty progressive little town, but demographically, everybody was very similar. I just remember for the first few years, even being so enthralled with the cultural scene in this huge city in the deep South, so different from where I grew up, so many different kinds of people, so many different cultures woven into the culture of the city, so many different neighborhoods with different demographics. And I was working in restaurants. So I was out in the public. I was doing a lot of work in the midst of all of these different kinds of people. You never really knew what you were going to get. And depending on who you were waiting on, there was a slightly different way that you would relate to people. And I would say that's true now. If you're waiting on an elderly couple in their 80s, you're probably going to be more polite and less hip than if you're waiting on a table of teenagers. Okay, so this isn't like that revolutionary. But for me, being so young, it was this like, whoa, I had to practice all of these different ways of relating to people, of understanding the underlying taboos that were threaded through this whole culture. And that to me is Mercury in Sag in a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius, where you're having to step out of your comfort zone. You're having to relate to people in a way that is different than you are accustomed to. And you are learning a lot along the way. You are learning what works, what doesn't. And then you're also having to look at some of the deeper threads of what's going on under the surface. If you have ever been in the South of the United States, there's a lot of history and it's uncomfortable history. And while the people largely coexist peacefully, there's just a lot that's unspoken. So this week, be looking for that within yourself where you're acting new, like a novice, like, okay, so I'm willing to see this differently. I'm willing to step outside of my comfort zone. And I'm also aware that there's a lot going on underneath the scenes. Like, I have to be careful. It's like when you travel to a foreign country, you're a tourist, you show up, you're ready to spend your money, you're ready to have a good time, but there's still an entire other culture that's going on all around you. And in many ways, you have to assimilate into that culture. You don't want to be rude. You want to make sure that you are acting within accordance of what their cultural norms are, even though, yes, you're used to being over here and speaking this language and acting in this way. On some level, you have to understand what you're dealing with. So this week is going to help you to do that. And the last thing that I'll say about Mercury, and this is an aspect that happens on Sunday, is that Mercury makes this trine to Ceres. So as you're stumbling through, because you will stumble when your mind twists emotions and security into weird facts, and this push that you have to understand yourself on a deeper level, to blow your own mind, and also understand that you will have to assimilate into new beliefs and they will be uncomfortable, that it's impossible for all of us to be in agreement, to act the same way, to follow the same rules. It's just impossible in a collective. But as you're working with, where do I fit in? How do I understand this? What is really going on? How do I change my mind? All of these questions that we've been talking about. Your body, which is represented by Ceres, is always a really good indicator. Your body tells you when to retreat, when to say something, and when to rest. Your body tells you when something feels dangerous, when something feels exhilarating. So we're going to back up because I talked about Mars being an aspect to Jupiter, and Mars on Wednesday is going to come into a trine with Saturn, which means that Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars are all going to be in a grand trine together in the water signs. Jupiter says, let's explore things from the big picture. Saturn says, let's make sure that we're building an appropriate foundation. And Mars says, let's move into action. So you're going to find situations that show up for you where you will be asked to do all of that, see something from a different perspective, and really like hold your ground. You don't have to go off the deep end. You don't have to try to convince anybody that what you see is right. You don't have to argue with people about what they see is wrong because you're practicing holding that foundation. And because Saturn's in Pisces, this is the foundation of your spiritual practice. This is where you're finding that center in your own body, where even when you feel activated, you don't have to respond to it. It's like reading through social media comments, people who impulsively write nasty, inflammatory comments. Why? Why? Which goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. Like there's always something underneath your immediate emotional reaction. So understanding what's underneath there is more useful than just firing off some nasty comment. So Saturn is saying, hold your center. While Jupiter's like, yeah, but let's look at it from a different perspective. And Mars is like, well, do we need to take any action? So remember that a grand trine is harmony. They work really well together, and sometimes they can go off the rails. Because we're looking at all three of these being in water signs, the tendency to get emotionally riled up is going to be big. I am telling you, in as much as you can, avoid getting mired in your big emotional reactions. Even if you feel that there's some explosion that's like under the surface, like I have to say something, I have to do something, see whether you can just take a time out, deep breath, take a day, and then approach the situation a day later because you're going to wait for the higher level information to come in. And we know that that's happening because Mercury, the ruler of the mind, is making all these connections with these spiritual teachers as the outer planets. And hopefully, the spiritual teachers are going to bring in some information that's true, that's right, that is less human, less righteous, less critical, and more that higher level knowledge that says, take a deep breath and chill. This is going to pass, and you do not want the drama that this reaction is going to instigate. And then finally, the last aspect I want to talk about is November 2nd. We see Venus making an opposition to Chiron. So this ties up all of this energy really nicely because every time that we get into this emotionally reactive state, or every time that our mind spins something into a storyline or is so set on something that we already know to be true and we are not going to release our hold on what we think to be true, what does it impact? It impacts our relationships because it's usually the people that we are around the most that end up kind of taking the brunt, or it's our neighbors, or it's the people that we are dealing with. And we don't want to have uncomfortable relationships with people. Now, Venus opposing Chiron. Venus is in Libra, the sign that she rules. And so she wants harmony. She definitely wants for things to feel smooth. But Chiron here is pointing out where they don't feel smooth, where there might have been issues from the past or things that were upsetting. And look, we're coming up pretty close here. It's not exact until Monday, but we're coming up pretty close with Venus making a square to Jupiter. So Jupiter has its little finger in all of these pies, and Jupiter in Cancer is like, what if I stir up some emotional stuff? What if I help you with a real big emotional reaction? And Venus is like, oh my God, I don't want a really big emotional reaction because that's going to throw me out of equilibrium. And Chiron is like, yeah, but if you aren't feeling seen and you aren't feeling heard and you're feeling like you're just giving and giving and you're unappreciated for that giving, eventually that's going to cause a reaction anyway. So, how about if we work to ease into this and use some of that mind control that we're working with this week? And that's what I always say about Mercury and Gemini is we have to work to control our minds. We can't let our minds spin out onto all of this nonsense that we see online, that we're reading. There's too much, and we don't even know what's true. So we can get totally addled over just fluff, information that's like, designed to throw you over the edge. So you don't want to just jump over the edge because you're like, hey, I just got influenced. Woo, here I go. Okay, so I want to recognize that maybe I have some old stories from my childhood that are coming into play here. And I don't want to get caught up in those as if they are the truth. I want to understand them for what they are so that I can maintain equilibrium in my relationships. And instead of allowing this Jupiter over here to spin me out, I want to use it to more deeply understand my own emotional needs right now. What do I need from this person that I'm in partnership with, that I'm in relationship with? Maybe I just need a hug. Maybe I need to talk something through. Maybe I need to be able to have a stronger boundary, what have you. These themes are going to feel pretty big just because looking at this chart, we see a lot of stuff at 24, 25, including Saturn and the moon over here. If Sunday feels hard, that's okay. You take a deep breath and you just give yourself some grace, really support yourself, practice being the very best partner to yourself that you can be, which includes saying no when your mind is trying to spin you out, saying let's take a break when your emotions are trying to rile you up, and creating that silence and space to connect in with your higher wisdom, allowing your body to lead the way. All right. Wow. That's a nice little nutshell. Okay. So I hope this was helpful, and I shall see you all at the end of the week. We are looking at Scorpio gifts. Scorpio has a lot of gifts. This would be a good supplementary video to listen to help you get through this week. All right. Have a good one.